How's it going, you guys? So, in this video, I'm going to be addressing a question I recently got from one of my subscribers. They wanted to know, they said they have a food journal, and they've been keeping a food log, and they've been logging their food. And they want to know some supplements and other factors involved in irritable bowel syndrome. And most importantly, what foods to cut out first, and how long after cutting out a trigger food should it take for them to notice an improvement. So, first of all, the number one most important thing for addressing the root cause of irritable bowel syndrome and resolving symptoms permanently is trying to figure out, first of all, if you have any food intolerances. That is the number one. So, keeping a food journal is vitally important. And it's vitally important for all health problems, but especially a digestive issue. For those who don't know my story, I was suffering from irritable bowel syndrome ever since I started trying to eat healthy, really. When I started eating more whole grains and fibrous foods was when I started to basically shit them out completely undigested, and I experienced anxiety, breathlessness, where I felt like I couldn't breathe, constant bloating, and just severe suffering. The number one most important thing is figuring out what foods are triggering it. So, at a baseline, the most common foods that trigger irritable bowel syndrome are whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts and seeds, and then certain uncooked vegetables like broccoli should generally be better tolerated after it's cooked, and other cruciferous vegetables as well. They do contain certain types of carbohydrates that are harder to break down than other plant foods. But when you cook them, especially cook them to mush, generally it's easier. But things like whole grains, nuts and seeds, beans, legumes, and other like pseudo grains like amaranth and quinoa and stuff like that tend to be hard to tolerate. And even if you try to soak them, sprout them, ferment them, cook them into mush, even if you try taking enzyme supplements, even if you do probiotic supplements, you still are going to probably notice trouble digesting those foods. I know that I did, and I spent a lot of money on supplements trying to help me to digest those problem foods. And eventually I just gave up and started to eat a autoimmune paleo diet, and all my symptoms went away and stayed away permanently as long as I didn't add those foods back in. Now, of course, everybody's going to have different trigger foods, and for a lot of people, if they follow traditional preparation methods, some of the preparation methods that are talked about in Weston Price's book, or Sally Follin's book, Traditional Diets, or Nourishing Diets. I recommend everybody read that. So you can understand why so many people have trouble digesting these plant foods. Is because we don't prepare them properly, really. Anyway, so that's vitally important. What are the most common trigger foods for irritable bowel syndrome? Typically, it's going to be extremely fibrous foods first. People who promote a plant-based diet as a way to remove irritable bowel syndrome is unlikely going to resolve without extreme supplementation. And maybe after a couple months of eating these highly fibrous foods, your digestive system will adapt, but it's unlikely, and I don't think it's worth it. I don't see any value in eating these foods if they cause you problems at all. You don't need any plant foods at all, really, so I don't understand why someone would go through so much suffering to try to digest them, unless they think that they're important for nutrients, which they're not. But anyway, typically it's those fibrous foods. Now, most generally, other autoimmune problems are triggered by foods like, the common allergens: eggs, dairy, wheat. What are some other ones? Citrus fruit, shellfish, Peanuts. Peanuts are a legume. Okay. Peanuts are a legume. They're more similar to beans than they are nuts and seeds. Um, but yeah, the typical allergens, soy. And soy is another legume like a peanut. So those are the most common allergens, and they typically are the ones that set off a lot of other, autoimmune conditions and digestive problems as well. So if you follow an autoimmune paleo diet, you're removing pretty much all of those with the exception of maybe eggs and shellfish. For me, the autoimmune paleo diet completely resolved my symptoms. So those are the common foods. And if you're keeping a food diary, then you should be tracking what foods set off your problems. But look, the most effective way to do the elimination diet for irritable bowel syndrome is to cut all of those foods out completely. Okay, so literally just eat, your meats, your safe vegetables, and maybe some of the fruits, because typically people shouldn't have any issues with bananas and berries and stuff like that. Bananas are a berry. Avocados, berries, and bananas were my main staples when I started that paleo diet, which I don't follow anymore, but I might do it every now and then. I do a keto diet now, or mostly carnivorous, but those should be safe unless you have a fructose malabsorption issue, and some people claim that they do. So if you remove all those problem foods first and stick to those foods I outlined, certain safe vegetables, fruits, and then the meats and, some of the fats too should be okay. And you just avoid those specific fermentable carbohydrates that tend to give people problems, the highly cellulose coated plants. Then you should notice a resolve of your symptoms within, really for me, it was within the first day of removing them. Always, always, always. But a lot of times, most of the other symptoms, a lot of people don't realize things like psoriasis, acne, and other problems, depression, insomnia. All of these problems typically come from undigested plant foods in your intestine. And after about 3 days, you should really start to notice some kind of improvement, okay? If you don't notice an improvement within at least 3 days, then there might be other issues beneath the surface, okay? But I would give it at least 7 days. After 7 days of removing all those foods I mentioned, you should notice a positive improvement. Now, if your symptoms don't go away after 7 days, there's a couple of other possibilities. Number one, maybe you didn't remove all the food intolerances, okay? The other thing is, so he asked, or she, my subscriber had asked, what about anxiety and stress? So listen, something you have to understand is that stress and anxiety, they're correlated with irritable bowel syndrome, but they're wrongfully said to cause it, okay? Most of the link between stress and disease, there's not actually a causal link that has been proven. It's a correlation, not causation. Okay, with that being said, if you're angry or you're stressed or you're anxious or whatever, so typically digestive problems can cause the anger and stress, just like most health problems, but in particular, irritable bowel syndrome tends to cause bloating in the stomach and intestines that can push up against the diaphragm and make it hard to breathe, which was something that seemed to have been contributing towards my breathlessness for so long and my anxiety and panic attacks. So when you remove that pressure in your stomach, it relieves the pressure on your diaphragm and allows you to breathe more freely. And when you breathe more freely, you can calm yourself down and breathe in a way that's conducive towards relaxation, okay? So the irritable bowel syndrome can be causing stress and anxiety. However, when you're in fight or flight mode, okay, for one, typically when people are stressed or anxious or sad, they lose their appetite. And when you lose your appetite, what happens is the digestive juices tend to slow down. A lot of people who have irritable bowel syndrome, they might actually just have a deficiency in stomach acid. And so, especially if you have reflux and other like heartburn and indigestion, typically that's caused by a lack of stomach acid. And then doctors prescribe antacid medications and make the problem worse. And typically that's a huge cause that people are completely unaware of, because mainstream medicine typically they try to solve a problem with another problem. So apple cider vinegar, raw, unpasteurized with the mother, and a full spectrum enzyme supplement. I recommend Super Enzymes by Now Foods. That's the best and most cost effective supplement you can buy, which contains bile, it contains hydrochloric acid, but also take apple cider vinegar about 20 minutes before meals, and eat the elimination diet that I mentioned, autoimmune paleo. Take those enzyme supplements and you should notice a difference if it's stomach acid or enzyme insufficiency. And anyway, when you're stressed or you're anxious, that can hinder your digestive juices from being stimulated. So if you have a lack of stimulation of the stomach acids and the digestive fluids, well, then you're not going to be able to break down the food that you're eating. And if you can't break down the food you're eating, it's not going to fully digest in your stomach or your intestines. And then it'll just kind of sit around. It'll cause inflammation. It'll cause pain, bloating, gas, and you will experience symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome. So stress can definitely play a role. But the problem is, if you're always stressed when you eat and you've tried everything you can to de-stress yourself, then obsessing over the negative effects of stress is only going to prolong the problem. You're never going to be able to defeat stress and anxiety by trying to defeat stress and anxiety, because the very nature of trying to defeat something is stress and anxiety. You can't fight the fight or flight response with fighting, guys. Okay, it's the same thing for insomnia. You don't fight to sleep, you fall asleep. You don't fight for love, you fall in love. So you've got to relax. Relax is the opposite of effort. So stop trying to de-stress yourself. Trying is stress. But for that, ashwagandha is something I actually put in my coffee earlier. Try looking into ashwagandha. Typically, my favorite is Terrasol. Terrasol, they have a whole root powder. It's not an extract, which is fine. You don't need an extract. And I would take 1/8 of a teaspoon of the Terrasol ashwagandha powder in the morning, and then take the same dose again during midday, and the same dose again before bed. But if you notice that you pee too much, then don't take it before bed, because it might increase the amount of urine production. But ashwagandha has an amazing regulatory effect on stress, and it doesn't necessarily, it will make you calm you down, but its most important role, most adaptogens' most important role, is to put your mind in a state that allows you to find the solutions to your problems. But it'll basically regulate your GABA receptors to help you calm the fuck down, even if you have problems that are caused by irritable bowel syndrome. And so it'll be a lot easier for you to kind of relax so you can eat without stress. But I don't think that there's a direct causal role from stress in most of these problems. But I definitely don't think, I think especially in digestive problems, stress can definitely hinder stomach acid production and make it harder to digest food. But if you notice that you're hungry, even though you might be anxious or whatever, then it's really the hunger. It's the appetite. So as long as you're hungry and you have an appetite, then that's what's up. Try to eat in a peaceful environment. Put some music on. Put yourself in a positive state of mind when you eat. Enjoyment, right? You need to create enjoyment in all aspects of your life. I honestly believe that we can all find ways to make our lives enjoyable. Even if you work as a cashier at a grocery store, a lot of people, they feel like that's a slave job. but it's the way you're perceiving it. Like, you can make any job enjoyable. You just got to create that, okay? And so all I'm saying is, like, you got to find ways to make it enjoyable, because enjoyment is the opposite of stress. Appreciation is the opposite of, dissatisfaction. So yeah, supplements, like I said already, apple cider vinegar and enzyme supplements can help. And for many people, that might be an underlying cause. Is there, because for me that wasn't the cause. Because I've always known pharmaceutical drugs tend to actually cause more problems than they solve. But most people are unfortunately suckered by their doctors into taking massive doses of antibiotics, massive amounts of stomach acid hindering drugs, which open the gateways to, obviously obstructive bowel disorder. Like, you can actually get, like, the food will not be digested without stomach acid, and it can completely block your intestines. Lots of horrible problems can result from those drugs. And then, of course, without stomach acid, your body can't properly methylate, which basically means it'll have trouble in the metabolism of vitamin B12, folate, and it'll have trouble turning over cells. And when your body can't turn over cells, what happens? Your cells grow out of control, and essentially they can possibly turn into tumors. Okay. And so all I'm saying here is fuck anti-acid medications, okay? And in this case, you need strong stomach acid. Really, it's impossible for the human body to have uh, overly acidic stomach. The problem is people don't understand how pH balance in the stomach works, and they don't realize it's generally bile and digestive fluids that come up the esophagus due to a alkaline pH in the stomach. So if you drink alkaline water, if you take baking soda and stupid shit like that, you're going to also notice those problems. Don't drink water around meals. Make sure you're eating enough salt. Your body needs both sodium and chloride in order to produce stomach acid. So if you're limiting salt, then that could be your issue right there. Um, so what are some other things? So maybe if you're drinking coffee, like, keep that hours before meals. Don't drink coffee around meals. And if you do want to drink something, I found that yerba mate tends to be a very good, beneficial beverage to drink after meals. Yerba mate tends to help with digestion. It helps to calm the digestive system down. And it should have kind of like a calming effect on your nervous system rather than the caffeine rush of most caffeinated beverages. I think black tea can be good after meals too. Just don't ever drink it on an empty stomach. But yerba mate tends to feel good in the digestive system if you drink it after meals. So if you need liquids, typically like yerba mate, and I found drinking yerba mate after meals and then washing that down with kombucha later, which I don't drink now, but that actually seemed to have a very profound benefit on my digestive system. I used to buy giant 2-liter bottles of kombucha that's locally made here where I live, and it was like $7 for 2 liters. And I would just drink a nice cold glass of kombucha after yerba mate, after a satisfying meal. And Jesus Christ, did it push those endorphins into my brain. It felt so satisfying. And so we know that kombucha, is full of probiotics and stuff like that. And typically people believe that it improves digestion. So maybe looking into that. And whatever vegetables you eat, you can eat them fermented or cooked. Leafy greens and kale and stuff like that, even when cooked, tends to cause digestive problems. I think those are better eaten raw, if anything, despite most people's fear of oxalates. But I would just remove any unnecessary vegetables altogether. I would focus on things like avocado, fermented vegetables, cooked cruciferous vegetables, strongly boiled carrots, stuff like that. And then if you're going to eat carbs, I think jasmine rice is okay. It's a safe one. But I would tend to stick to, berries. Bananas are a berry. Fucking avocado's a berry. And then, you could easily eat peaches and citrus and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, so yeah. So if you have any other questions, post them down below. Irritable bowel syndrome can have lots of causes. It can be caused by, you know, fucking, low stomach acid. It can be caused by a hernia. It can be caused by certain medications you might be on or you might have been on. Even things like antihistamines can indirectly cause issues like this. Proton pump inhibitors, um, antibiotics, they can cause problems years down the line. Okay. Um, what else? I mean, there's quite a few medications and quite a few things that can cause irritable bowel syndrome. And I don't think probiotic supplements are particularly helpful. I mean, maybe in the short term, there are some people who have used some probiotics and experienced some benefits, but I think over time, you've got to make the dietary choices that are conducive to healing. So, some book recommendations. Check out the GAPS protocol. The GAPS protocol is a very complicated protocol, but it tends to be the standard for many people. The FODMAPs diet is another one that people use clinically for irritable bowel syndrome. Check out Paleo Principles by Dr. Sarah Ballantyne, PhD. It's a giant textbook that explains everything you need to know. Of course, there's some things in it that are questionable. And maybe check out the Carnivore Code just to get the, conspiracy theories about vegetables, so you can contemplate that. But probably the best book you can read is Nourishing Diets by Sally Fallon, because it basically talks about all the indigenous tribes and how they spent weeks preparing these plant foods to be able to digest them. And it talks about how you can survive on mostly meat and the importance of meat and fat and how our ancestors ate pretty much every fucking thing that they could find. They ate bugs, they ate grubs, they ate dirt, they literally ate the entire intestine out of buffalo, including shit and partially digested vegetables that are rotting in the intestine of the bison, of the buffalo. It'll really open your mind to, there's so much more to nutrition than what mainstream medicine preaches, and that might actually be exactly the insight you're looking for. So, yeah, hopefully that helps. Let me know if there's anything I missed, and I'll make another video.